All right, well, I'm going to read from the Gospel of John, chapter 2. The title of this sermon, the title of this message is called Wine of Obedience. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. In your pew Bibles, this is page 751. 751. There's a big 2 next to it, and I'm reading from Jesus Changes Water to Wine. Chapter 2, verse 1. Yeah. There we go. Page 751 in the pew Bibles. All right, let's start over here. The title of this message is Wine of Obedience. The Gospel of John, chapter 2. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, and holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tested the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best to last." This, the first of his miraculous signs Jesus performed in Cana in Galilee. So the title of this message is Wine of Obedience. And here we have a wedding. Now, weddings in those days were more like Cambodian weddings than American weddings. American weddings go from 1 to 3 with 30-minute church service, 15-minute picture taken, 10 minutes shaking hands, a toast, a this, a that, a dance, and got to be out so the next party can come in. Does everyone know what I'm talking about? On schedule, on point. When I have gone to weddings in Lowell with the Cambodian friends that I have, they just say, "Just show up whenever you like." "What time does it go to?" "Don't worry about it." "When is it?" "Friday, Saturday, Sunday too." "What?" "Oh yeah, just come whenever you want, for as long as you want, whenever you want." Weddings back then were like that. They were special occasions. They lasted a longer time than we might be used to. It was also in that peasant culture, the biggest highlight for a society was when they had weddings. Now it says Jesus was invited to the wedding. I would suggest, and it's an obvious point, that it would be a good idea if you get married to invite Jesus to your wedding. I would even advise you more to invite him to your marriage. But he won't come if he's not invited. And people have noticed that there's less and less people getting married in churches, which may or may not concern me. What concerns me more is whether they're having Jesus in their wedding. The word that I wanted to talk about in this lesson today is about Jesus. Last week we learned what his name was for all eternity. His name was Logos. You see, in the beginning, he was called Logos. He was named Jesus. He shall be called Jesus, was what the angel said. So he took on the name Jesus. Well, one of the key words we're going to study today is the word Logos. Just so happens to, Logos, which just so happens to sound like Logos, but is a different word. And if you know, we have a couple Dutch people here, and there's a great Dutch toy maker that made a toy called Legos. And my understanding, he's the richest man in the country, by the way, or the family is, that makes Legos. You guys know what that is, where you put all those things together. Well, the word Legos in Latin and in the Greek means to put things together. And apparently, he did not name his toys after the word in the Latin or the Greek, but it was a shortening of some Dutch expression, which means play well. Maybe we could know what that is, but I don't know. But it's a coincidence. Maybe God doesn't have coincidences, but this whole idea that I want to talk about is one of the lessons, is this concept of Legos, which is to put things together. Now, you know what it's like when you put a whole bunch of Legos on the ground, and then you've got this crazy instruction kit, and you have to put it together exactly like you're supposed to. Otherwise, it doesn't come out. My wife likes to not do things with the directions, and halfway through sometimes says to me, "This thing's broken." I look at the directions and put it together wrong and then call my father. But the word Legos is used when Mary speaks to the servant, when she says about Jesus, "Do whatever he says." What Mary is literally saying is, put it together however he says to put it together. And we'll talk about that a little later, but I wanted to throw out a few words at the beginning. The thing that struck me about this story is it's really not a story just about Jesus. It really is a story about Jesus and his mother. Because what you have here is you have somebody who's beyond the coming of age, Jesus. He's not 12 years old in the Father's temple anymore. He's now a man. He's 30. He's likely been the breadwinner for a while in the household because, for all accounts, the experts say that Joseph had died a long time ago. There's no mention of Joseph since Jesus was 12 years old. And like some of us might have to do, not myself, it's difficult to be, at a young age, somebody who's the man of a household. But when you're very young, you still need your mother for lots of things. But there's a point in time where you grow up and you become a man. And there's something happening here in this interaction with mother and Jesus that I don't know if I can put it into words, but it's a changing of the relationship, like a changing of the guard. And it's a normal thing and it's a natural thing. And what's happening is that Mary, throughout Jesus' earlier years, told Jesus what to do. And then there reached a point in time where Jesus was a man and Mary became deferential to Jesus. Now, all of us know that we have to go through these same things, cut the cord. Now, some of you might be thinking, boy, my mother needs to hear this. This isn't, I'm not talking to mothers unless you happen to be a mother. And some of you might be thinking, my son needs to hear this, and I'm not talking to sons unless you happen to be a son. And what I'm trying to encourage is that there's a point in time where if you're a young man, then you need to take more responsibility in a family. And there's a point in time, if you're a mother, that you need to abdicate, or to hand over, pass the baton to that younger generation and let them rise up. And I think that happens here. Mary was invited to be in the wedding and be in charge. But when there was a problem, Mary went to Jesus. When you have a problem in your life, go to Jesus. Be like Mary. Now, there's a couple interesting things that happen here as Jesus calls her woman. Now, unfortunately, in today's society, to call a woman woman has inherently an implication of disrespect. That was not there 2,000 years ago. It says something about society that to call a woman has some element of almost implicit disrespect in it. But it wasn't that way. As a matter of fact, the closest word that some people would say is dear woman, because we don't have a word in English for that. We should. That just means dear woman. Yeah, he's not calling her mummy anymore. Okay? But dear woman. So dear woman, This is an interesting interaction. They have no wine. The woman goes right to Jesus, says they have no more wine. She doesn't tell him what to do. Now, that's a hard thing for a mother. Mothers need to remind us of things, amen? It's a harder thing to remind but not tell their younger adult children what to do. She doesn't tell him what to do. She just reminds him. That's pretty motherly, and I think we all need that. Otherwise, we'd forget our own birthdays. At least men. That's why we're talking about this. So she's not excessive, but she's being motherly, and then she's being deferential to Jesus. Jesus answers her and says, "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" What he's really literally saying, what does this have to do with me and you? What does this have to do with me and you? That's what Jesus answers. Now, by any stroke, that sounds harsh, but we're going to have to wait to decipher that. But I just want you to expect that if you went up and told somebody something that says, what does that have to do with me and you? These guys are being good up front. So then he says this. He gives an explanation, and he says, my time has not yet come. The word time here is the word hora in Greek, which is where in Spanish the word hora comes from, which means hour. My hour has not yet come. Now, we know that, as I've talked about, and I mentioned once in a sermon on beautiful, or a gate called beautiful, that the word beauty in the New Testament is the word that which is in its season. So that which is in its season is considered beautiful. Or it's used with regard to fruit, that which is ripe. And though I was speaking about my grandfather who ate healthy and how he influenced me, well, really what he taught me is to eat seasonally, so that there are certain things to eat at different times of the year. And at this time of the year in New England, it might be apples or tomatoes. And a few months ago, I'm telling my wife, buy me all the sun-kissed oranges you can. Or a few months after that, they're bringing up some fresh fruit from Chile, or whatever, or roots in the fall. You see, we have this seasonal thing that allows you to be fresh, way before there was refrigeration. Some people think that trying to be beautiful is to stay a certain way. They want to just be in a refrigerator. But actually, it is that which is seasonable. By the way, all the warnings about beauty in the Bible, like in 2 Peter, don't use the same word beautiful. They use the word cosmos, or spirit of this world, such as in cosmopolitan. Beware of the spirit of this world. It has nothing to do with physical attractiveness or not. Sorry for the digression. This is actually important because Jesus uses this. He says, my time has not yet come. That gave me a whole thing about time again. Here we are. We talked about time last week, and now we're going to talk about time again. And I was thinking about this idea of time. We've heard of these terms, Kairos moment and Chronos. We got somebody who works at the Chronos company, which comes from the word which we take the word chronology, which just means calendar time. But then there's this Kairos moment, which for Christian means a divinely appointed moment, a special time for special things to happen. For a teacher, they would use the word teachable moment. It means a passing instant where an opening appears which must be driven with force if success is to be achieved. I don't like to read things, but let me say this again. The word literally means a passing instant where an opening appears. Think of taking a shot in hockey or making a pass in football, which must be driven with force, no lollipop throw, if success is to be achieved. An appointed time, a crucial time. Now in Latin, we have the word carpe diem. Does anyone know what that means? What does it mean in English? Seize the day, seize the moment. Now, is seize the moment a Christian thought or a worldly thought? Well, we're going to talk about wine later, and right now we're talking about seize the moment. Look, I'm not up here, I'm not talking to 4-year-olds to tell you this is right, this is wrong. I want you to try to think about things the way the Holy Spirit has directed me, but more importantly, the way he directs you. And what I would say is that this concept of seize the moment doesn't give me enough information, not enough data. Tell me more, such as what a good reporter would ask, why? It's all in the why, not the letter Y, by the way. Herrick wrote a poem which was imitating an early Greek writer who was himself a Christian. And he started out, to the virgins to make much of time. Gather the rosebuds while you may. Old time is still a-flying. And this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. In the Psalms 90, it talks, teach me to number my days, right out of Scripture. Clearly a scriptural concept. Help me to number my days. Help me to pay attention to time. But why? I'm going to give you two very different reasons why. One is the pessimist. And this is Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton. He calls it the cult of pessimistic pleasure seekers. This is a hopeless seize the day. Seize the day because we're all under a sentence of death. Seize the day. Let's grab at our few nice opportunities, like a prisoner on a Texas death row that gets to eat whatever he wants before he's executed. Seize the day. Eat all you can when you can. You must enjoy the moment for the moment's sake before they're all gone. Let me just tell you something. Those people that tell you to seize those days, and they tell you it if you're young or if you have young kids, they're telling you to overthink every moment and thus kill the passing pleasure. Because they're telling you it's going to be snatched from you. It's going to be a lot worse later on, so seize the day. I want nothing to do with that. I'm going to come back to the Christian view, but it's a very interesting thing, and it needs to be mentioned. I'm going to tie it into this thought that I'm doing, that Jesus turned water to wine. There's no indication that this was grape juice or anything of the sort. They didn't have O'Doul's back then. Now, you're expecting me to talk about wine and talk about whether it's good or bad. And we got the people that are waiting for me to jump up here like the women in the 20s and smash some wine bottles. And then they got the people over here that want me to tell you that it's okay to drink. I'm going to do neither one of those. What? I will tell you a story that's not true, but a great little parable, that when Noah planted the vine, it says that the devil sacrificed 4 animals. First he sacrificed a lamb, then a lion, then an ape, and then a pig. The lion first, because when people start to drink, they're gentle and meek and pleasurable. Later, as they drink more, they turn into a lion, thinking they're bold and courageous and can do anything. A little bit later on, after a few more pops, they act like an ape, completely foolish. Do I need to explain the pig? All right. Here's the pessimist, carpe diem, attitude of the devil, attitude towards drink. Actually, time out. I will give you a few rules of thumb. I'm not going to tell you whether to drink or not drink. But people who drink to become happy or drink because they're miserable, that's not what Jesus is advocating here. Never drink when you're wretched without it. It may be okay to have a drink when you're happy without it, but never drink because you need it. It may be okay to drink if you don't need it. But this is what the pessimist says, the carpe diem. Drink because you don't know where you come from or why. Drink because you don't know where you go or where. Drink because the stars are cruel. life is hard, and the world is meaningless. Drink. There's nothing worth trusting, nothing worth fighting for, and no one out there. Hello, have you ever heard anybody drink like that and sound like that after they drank? These people make wine into a medicine. By the way, Christians should never say that wine is for medicine because of that one little verse that Paul says to take a little wine. The pessimists say wine is a medicine. They take this medicine, and as doctors, we bring them in and we say they're self-medicating themselves with alcohol. We use the term all the time. They're self-medicating what? Their depression, their this, their that. They're self-medicating their need for God. Now let's go to the Christian. Chesterton said, men can't love mortal things, only love immortal things for an instant. But this is what another person comes by and says. He says, drink, for the world is as red as this wine, with the crimson of God's love and wrath. Drink, for the trumpets to battle have already begun to blow. Drink, for I know whence you come and whence you go. Drink, for I know when you go and where. Drink, for this is my blood of the new covenant shed for you. That's a different person talking about drinking for a different reason. Don't overthink a happy moment. Don't remind youth every minute that they're going to be old and ugly like me someday. Let them. Isn't some of the splendor of youth that you can stretch your legs out as long as you want, that there's a little bit of immortality there, that, the days seem like they'll never end? When we get old, we can complain that the years fly by. A long time for my son is about 2 days. Just ask him. Did that make sense to anybody? We're not going to stand up here and slam Bibles and tell you do drink or don't drink. If you want to know what percentage of the people are drinking in the first set of things, the overwhelming majority. Okay? But nonetheless, I'm not going to stand up here and explain for Jesus why he made wine. Okay? He doesn't need me to explain for him. Back to Mary and Jesus. This gets into sort of the main thing of the message here. So what happened is Mary went to Jesus and she talked about something that didn't concern him or her. Hey, that's what intercessory prayer is. When you pray for somebody, you pray for a need that's not your own. You're really saying to God, God, I pray for this need. And that's what Mary does with Jesus. And Jesus says, what does that have to do to me, to you? And she doesn't answer him back or talk back to him and say, I'm your mother. She then goes to the servants and says, do whatever he says. Put together whatever he says. You got the broken Legos, he'll tell you how to put them together. The word servants has the root word obedience in it, which is interesting. It's diakones, where I think they get the word deacons. It's funny, I was trying to explain obedience. I got like 7 definitions. But if you forget them all, the word obedience means just to say okay and do it. So obedience is okay. I tried to look up where okay comes from, but nobody knows. There's different kinds of obedience. One is to be prepared and obedient. The first part of obedience might be not doing something. Hold your horses. Wait till God tells you what to do. Wait till he shows you what to do. That's the first part of obedience, okay, is waiting to not run ahead of God. Don't worry, he'll tell you what to do in his time, when it's his time. The second part of obedience is complete obedience. Complete, no trimmings. There's a beautiful video with Helen Keller and her teacher. You got to find it on YouTube or wherever, where the teacher explains how Helen Keller learned how to speak. They put one finger on her nose. Helen Keller put one finger on the lady's nose, one on her mouth and one on her throat, like this. And when she spoke and her vocal cords vibrated, she could hear the sound. And with other sounds, she could hear it come from the blow from the lips. And with the other, the nasal sounds with her finger. Helen Keller was not allowed to say, I don't want to put this one here, I don't want to put this one here, I don't want to put this one here. If you shall speak, you must do it just like this. And boy, she could speak really good for somebody who was deaf and mute. No longer mute. Then there's practical obedience, which is just to follow the plain command of Christ. We all make mistakes. We all don't do what we should do, but we're a fool when we persist in it. Then there's personal obedience. This one I like. A needs some help, tells B. B goes and tells C, why don't you go help A? Go think about that. It's simple. Somebody tells you they need help and you say, go call somebody else. Personal obedience means, well, I'll tell you what it doesn't mean. When Jesus says, I was hungry and you sent me to somebody else. Prompt obedience. Delay takes the bloom out of obedience. Waiting can actually make obedience ruined. When Mary tells the servants, do whatever he tells you to do, she doesn't wait and hear what he says he's going to do. That's obedience. I'm telling you, when you want to jumpstart obedience, try to tell my middle child something to do. She is halfway there doing it before you can get out what to do. And then if you tell her to do the opposite, she's running the other way. Do this, okay, don't do it, okay. Obedience. Obedience is not, you wait and hear it and it's something you agree with, so now you'll do it. And then the last thing I would say is perpetual obedience. Finish strong with your obedience. People die. What do people say when they die? How'd they die? Oh my gosh, how'd that person die? You know what God says when people die? How'd they live? How'd they live? Were they obedient through their life? Finish strong. Then I said private obedience. Do it in secret to be seen by God. Precious obedience. Obey is love. You can obey and not love, but you can't love and not obey. You got to do a Venn diagram. Basically, love fits in obey, but it's not necessarily there. I'll draw that later. Jesus himself said, if you love me, you'll obey me. I'm finishing up here because I'm loyal to my time here. I want to finish up with this. The nature of this miracle. We have to talk about, he did a miracle. Jesus didn't tell his disciples to go do it. We talked about authentic miracles, not some scam, not some trick, not some eye candy thing. You see what happened? Mary was very careful to have the servants do it, not Jesus' disciples. Jesus was very careful to tell them to fill up these jars to the brim, to make it clear that he wasn't going to pour wine in later. These same servants brought the wine to somebody else who didn't know what Jesus had done, who verified that this was the best wine he had ever tasted. Do you see that authenticity, the veracity, the legitimacy, the righteousness, the pureness of the water to wine? Why did Jesus do it? I've said this at JSK last year. If you didn't hear it, it's very simple. The miracles he did was only to do what he saw his Father doing. His Father, who allows people to plant a grape seed in the ground, to water it, to have sun go on it, to have a vine grow up, and from that vine to grow up, to have grapes come, and then be squashed with a wine press, and then be fermented and some yeast added, and wine made. And that long process that happens to go from water to wine. That's what Jesus did. The water to wine. He did what his Father did. He didn't turn the stone jars into monkeys and have them swing from the trees to entertain the guests. He did things that he saw his Father doing. Somebody once asked somebody, you know, what would you do if God told you to jump through a wall. And he said, I would just jump through the wall. And they said, well, how are you going to do that? He said, my job is to jump. It's God's job to get me through the wall. So when God tells you to do something, you do it. He'll get you through the wall. Don't worry about outrageous requests. Mary made an outrageous request. Jesus made like 180 gallons of wine that day. It's just an absurd amount. It's crazy. You know, who's my favorite pagan? Everybody knows my favorite pagan king that hears me at JSK. Who is it? Alexander the Great. Somebody came to him, as I got this going down my back, and they said to him, a man has come and asked to have a gift for his daughter for the wedding. And he said, okay. Then the person came back and said, oh my goodness, he asked for so much stuff from you. And you know what Alexander the Great said? He can have it all. You know why? Because he must think me generous to ask for so much. How much more our Father in heaven when we ask him for great things? Don't we know he's generous? This is the word of God.